I want to talk to you guys a little bit about lines and rods that I use when I go to different lines and why I might use different lines. And basically the two lines that I use all the time is either Braid or Flourocarbon. Now they're very, very rarely will I ever use mono, and to be honest with you, I haven't used mono in like 3 years. I don't plan on starting now, okay? But what we're gonna do today is tell you some of the different ways that I use different lines and what rod that I'll use with a different line. And one of the things that I do that not a whole lot of people do, but it works really well for me, chatterbait. This is the Freedom CFL, but you know, chatterbait. I will use, when I don't get my lines all tangled up, let's go ahead and put this other rod down for right now. I will use, because most of the time when I'm using a chatterbait, I'm fishing it in submerged vegetation. Like this big flat right here is all hydrilla out behind us. So when your chatterbait's coming through there, a lot of times you're popping it and snapping it, and popping it and snapping it, trying to snap that grass off of it because it's vibrating real nice, and it gets some grass on it, and it kind of gets dead, and you gotta pop it and get it going again. Well, fluorocarbon, which big misconception that fluorocarbon doesn't have any stretch in it. That is completely false. Fluorocarbon has just as much stretch as monofilament does. It's just a little bit denser so you can feel the stuff through it better, but it has lots of stretch. So that's why when you're trying to using something that you're popping the grass off with a lot, I'm going to braided line. But when I'm using braided line, any lure that I'm going to be reeling, I will always use a fiberglass rod. This is the Halo Cranking series. But anytime I'm winding something with braid, I'm going to use a cranking rod, and a cranking rod has a more parabolic bend. Braid has no stretch in it at all. So when a fish does take my lure, this rod bends a lot further before it really locks up. So that way, that's almost the stretch that a normal line has. I'm getting that out of the rod, but I'm using the braid to be able to crack the grass off of it. So I'm giving and taking, but it all works very well. And if I'm getting in a situation where I'm going to throw a lipless crankbait or a Nichols pulsator spinnerbait on braid where I have to crack it through the grass a lot, I'll even throw those on a cranking rod too. So to me, any type of bait that's a moving bait, if I have to fish braid with it, I'm going with the cranking rod. Now most of the time when I'm casting plastics and stuff like that into open water situations, I'm not talking about when we're punching and down in the thick stuff. I'm talking about when we're casting in open water situations, and especially clear water situations. That's when I go with fluorocarbon line. Fluorocarbon line is, for lack of a better term, it's a lot sneakier. It's very, very slick, very, very smooth, so it slides through the water really good. I really think fish can sense the braid coming through the water, and that's why I don't like to use it with plastics much unless I'm actually punching. But it slides through the water very good, and it's very invisible under the water too, so you can get away with, you know, a little bit heavier line normally than you could with especially with braid or with monofilament. Fluorocarbon doesn't refract the light nearly as much as monofilament does, so it's just, you know, it's nearly invisible to the fish. So where before you might have to use 6-pound monofilament or 8-pound monofilament, now you can get away in the same clarity of water with maybe 12-pound fluorocarbon. So it just gives you some more power, lets you get away with more stuff. But typically I will go with a medium heavy or even a heavy graphite rod. Now this is a KS2 Elite from Halo. It's the one I use most of the time. As you'll see, it's a 7.5 medium heavy. Why I'll do that is because fluorocarbon has a lot of stretch. And I know I said this a little bit earlier in this video, but most people don't realize this, but fluorocarbon actually has a lot of stretch. And all you have to do, everybody's got some fluorocarbon laying around, wrap your hand around at one side, wrap your hand around the other side, and pull. And you will find out that there's a lot of stretch in fluorocarbon. That is a huge misconception when fluorocarbon came out, that there's no stretch in it. Well, there's lots of stretch in it. So you think about on a 30-foot cast, on a 30-yard cast, you have to pick up a lot of stretch. So when you set the hook, not only do you have to wind up and jerk, but you have to have a heavy enough rod to be able to drive you know, driving that trocar home way out there. You have to be able to drive it home. So that's why we use a heavier graphite rod with fluorocarbon, and we use a cranking rod with braid anytime we're using moving baits. Hope that helps you guys figure out which rods and which lines to use with which rods for specific techniques.